That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The British Constitution provides that taxation and representation shall go together. Therefore, women taxpayers are entitled to vote.
I have a dream today. Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true.
Well, welcome to episode 40 of the Only Human podcast. We're glad to have you with us this week. We're going to continue our discussion of leadership today, and I want to start with a little vignette from a movie I think most of us have probably seen. The movie's Titanic. And the particular scene I want to talk about was when, I guess the character's name was Brock Lovett. He was played by Bill Paxton in the movie, and he was the captain of the salvage ship that was over the top of the sunk Titanic. And he's, in this particular scene, he's on there with his crew and the now elderly Rose Dawson. And as they're discussing the impact and the maneuvers that the Titanic made before it hit the iceberg, it comes out that Captain Edwin Smith, who was the captain of the Titanic, had always commanded smaller ships with much larger rudders. Right? So the way that you missed something that you might be headed toward was to slow down, stick that big rudder out in the water, and let the ship turn. The difference was, with the Titanic, it was a much larger ship and had a much smaller rudder. So the actual thing he had to do was to increase speed, which sounds hugely counterintuitive. But in order to get the maximum effectiveness out of that rudder, he actually needed to add power. Those of us that have flown airplanes know the term. It's called cornering velocity. And it is that speed that you reach where you have maximum G available to make the hardest turn that you could possibly make. And so in this discussion, which was fascinating to me, there's one comment made by Brock Lovett. And as they're discussing this, he turns to his other crew members and says, "That poor bastard. He had 25 years of experience, and it was all working against him." And that kind of leads me into our discussion for today, which we're going to continue to talk about leadership. But we're going to talk about leadership with this in mind, that the ships we are captaining have changed. They've changed a lot. And yet we haven't been fully aware of the magnitude of the change and the things that have to happen, the training that needs to occur, the professional development that needs to occur for us to be effective leaders of these new ships. So that's where we're going today with 5 or 6 really innovative ideas on how we need to change leadership professional development. And we're going to kick it off, like always, with our Blue Thread Proverb of the Week. And this week it's number 17. It says, "You can analyze the past, but you must design the future." You can analyze the past, but you must design the future. And that's because of all the things we just talked about, right? New technologies, a new workforce, a cross-generational workforce, a DEI workforce, new economic norms and social pressures, and all of the mental health stuff that's going on. The way that we learn to lead, the way that I learned to lead. And I've mentioned before, I've had $500,000 at least of leadership training. All of it was useful. Some of it was very good, but nearly all of it leaves me feeling like Captain Smith on the Titanic. It just doesn't map to the new world. So with that in mind, for the past 6 months or so, I have been working on what a new leadership professional development might look like. And it came to me that not only do we need to change the competencies of our leaders, but we may need to change how we use them altogether. So next week, we are launching the 21st Century Leadership Academy. I say we, Convergent Performance, my company. I usually don't talk much about the company other than our 60-second promo spot we put in the middle, but I think it's long overdue and much needed. Today, we're going to talk about some of the kind of wild and crazy things that are going to be involved with it. And it's important that as we look at leadership in the 21st century, especially we're almost a quarter of the way through it now, we have to take into account all of those things we talked about. That maybe even the majority of traditional office workers are now working from home, right? Millennials are now the largest group in all of our organizations in the workforce. Economic uncertainty, all of those things change the competencies of a leader in today's world. So let's go ahead and jump into these ideas. There's 5 or 6 of them. I've got some weird names for them, but I'll kind of break them down. The first one, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use leaders at all, right? I want to throw this whole idea of having a project manager or a program manager out the door. I think that's old school. What I'm calling this right now is dynamic leadership allocation system. And what it means is that certain leaders possess certain innate and trained competencies that are appropriate maybe for one phase of a project or a program, but not the other, right? And typically what you'd have is a program manager who would assign different tasks out to different specialists. But he or she was still the one person you could go to that was responsible. And I think the problem with that is we've got a lot of Edwin Smiths captaining Titanics. Their insights, their talents might be old school when we need new school, right? So how would this work? What would it look like? I think the first thing to understand is that instead of having a static leadership role, project manager, program manager, we implement a system where leadership roles are allocated across time frames based on real-time needs, the competencies of those leaders, and the project or program phase. What are the demands of the moment? Let's take an example. The quality challenge at Boeing, right? Everybody's paying attention to that. What's probably needed here is somebody to get the ball rolling. That's already happened, right? They had a 40,000 employee quality stand down across their organization a few months ago. But from there, where does it go? And I'm sure there's a lot of things going on at Boeing, right? They have a lot of experts. But in this system, the baton would then be passed. The new leader of the effort would be the person to do that next indicated thing, which is what? I don't know, maybe it's an assessment of the challenges by geographical location or by functional work area. And that's all they do. They're not fixing problems, they're just assessing them. And then the baton gets handed to the professional development training lead, who then develops the mitigations, the changes. And then maybe it gets handed to the cultural lead, who has to now begin to work and shape an entire culture around these identified challenges, right? Leveraging that kickoff, leveraging the training and protocols to bring it all together as a team. And then maybe it gets handed off to somebody else. But as you can see, this differs from the one person is in charge of this, right? So how would we do that? And we're going to show organizations how to assess real-time needs, predict some future needs, identify the specific strengths of their leadership team, and have those teams readily available to be assigned so that they can pick up the baton when it's their turn to lead. There's a lot of benefits for this in the modern world. First of all, it ensures the most suitable leader is in place for the particular challenge and moment, right? It allows the organization to swap out leaders without having to fire somebody or hire somebody new to adapt to changing circumstances, right? It maximizes ownership of the challenge, right? And finally, it avoids burnout with one guy or gal that's got to see this whole thing through. And at the end, there's high fives all around. It's shared accolades and shared accountability. And most of all, what you've created is a real team cohesion. So this idea of getting rid of traditional program and project managers, I think is really something whose time has come. So that's the first weird idea. I started with the least weird. It'll get weirder. This one's already kind of being done out there in a lot of different places. I call it crowdsourced decision making. So the idea is, rather than a bunch of leaders getting together with a whiteboard and brainstorming ideas, you basically send it out to everybody. It says, here's our challenge. The problem with that is right now there's a lot of people who like to keep that information close to the vest so it doesn't get out. But this idea of saying, okay, we got a quality problem that's going, right? Now, trust me, we'll keep going back to this as an example, but I'm sure they've talked a lot about we need to hear what you think, right? But do they have a single platform? Not for people to identify quality challenges, but for people to answer specific questions about solutions. So use a digital platform to gather suggestions, feedback, innovative ideas from employees, managers, supervisors at every level. Cool thing about modern day is you can get all that data and artificial intelligence will summarize it for you quickly, right? And then leaders can review and integrate this input into their decision-making process. The super cool thing about this is one of the most difficult things in any organization is change resistance. And when you have asked everybody for their input, and then you are providing that feedback that says, based on your input, we're going to recommend we do the following things. What do you all think about that? Again, AI takes a look at it and says, okay, here's the resistance areas that you need to overcome. Here are the ideas that they really, really like. It democratizes decision-making. It fosters a sense of ownership amongst all levels of employees. And then most of all, like I said before, it reduces change resistance. So none of us are as smart as all of us. And the people that are closest to the problems usually have their hands on the tools or the controls. And in a very real way, it helps leaders stay connected to the broader organizational pulse. So crowdsourced decision-making, that's weird idea number 2. But there's some specific steps that you would have to do to implement this. And it begins with your collection of data system, how you want your artificial intelligence algorithms to analyze it. All of those things we've thought through pretty well. Please feel free to reach out if you'd like to hear more ideas. All right, here's another one. How do we currently evaluate leaders? Man, there's a ton of metrics out there. I think the current workforce demands a specific set. I'm going to call it empathy-driven performance metrics. Right? So the basic overall concept is to shift from traditional results-oriented performance to empathy-driven metrics that are given the same weight as to whether or not you met your production goals or your retention goals or whatever they are. And it would assess leaders based on their ability to understand, connect with, and support their team members. Here's why this is so important. I mean, one of the very first leadership courses I ever had began with, if you don't have a follower, you don't lead anyone, right? Followership defines your power as a leader. And followership is developed through these metrics of empathy. So what are those metrics, right? Emotional intelligence, communication skills, conflict resolution, morale, what we used to call esprit de corps. How would you gather that? Pretty routinely. I mean, back when I worked for the federal government, I had a 360-degree feedback session twice a year. It was all encompassing. It was very powerful and frankly took quite a bit of time from everybody I worked with to complete. I think you can miniaturize those things, and I've done a little bit of that work already, to routinely gather some of these metrics on a relatively routine basis. A 5-minute survey on the leader's ability to understand, are they an active listener? All of those type things that could, once again, feed into a system that's going to create some metrics that are weighted for all kinds of things, right? And that could be promotion, it could be, bonuses, it could be a lot of things. Why would we do such a thing? Well, the workforce is changing, right? We have still have a lot of baby boomer senior leaders. We have a lot of aging millennials getting up there into their 40s that are disconnected from different generations and different parts of the DEI equation, right? So by focusing on empathy-driven metrics, we're going to see how well leaders are reaching across these, right? I think there's some clear benefits to this. Higher job satisfaction, reduced turnover, overall growth of followership. And I think it's absolutely essential that we do this right away if we're going to optimize this generational handoff and DEI initiatives rather than just survive them. So far, what have we done? We've talked about changing the way that we assign leadership roles and responsibilities, right? Getting away from that single point leader to handing off the baton as we move through a challenge. We talked a little bit about crowdsourcing leadership decisions, right? And sharing both the burden and the accolades for that. And now we talked about this idea of changing the metrics on how we evaluate leaders, or at least adding some metrics. I'm going to go to another one that I think is important. And the age of artificial intelligence has really, really made this possible. For a long, long time, I've thought about this concept of growth-based training, where you never see the same thing twice in your career unless you need to because you forgot it, right? That you measure where a person is across the set of competencies, you pick them up right there, and you grow them. There's been a lot of discussion for many years about the whole person leadership. What does the whole person competency look like now? Is it, the ability to influence, emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, problem solving, communication skills, group dynamics? There's just a ton of these things that leaders need to have a grasp of. And so this idea of a personalized leadership growth-based program, I'm calling it sustainability and growth program, would include a pretty comprehensive assessment, wouldn't have to be done all at once, that's then graded and you are plugged in to these various training modules and practical training situations right where you need to be. So it not only focuses on your weakness, but it's going to pick you up in your strong points and grow you from where you're at. Absolutely possible. And the neat thing about this is that it would grow with you throughout your career, right? From the first day you raised your hand and said, I'm ready to be a first-line supervisor or a functional team lead, all the way to when you were sitting in the C-suite someday. So what would this kind of training look like? I think theoretically it would include a mix of book learning and practical training, right? Case studies, role playing, real life projects, And it would require and provide continuous feedback and adjustments based on your strengths, weaknesses, accomplishments, setbacks, etc. I think all the tools are available to put this in place right now. What we currently get is you get selected to a leadership course, you go to it, you get what everybody else gets, and hopefully the group has moved to a new level. This individualizes and personalizes leadership development. Once again, well past due. And now a lot of the new technologies makes it absolutely achievable and affordable. Couple more I got for you here. A few years ago, when I was with the federal government, and I was in a program called the Senior Executive Service Candidate Development Program, all of us were assigned a leadership coach. And mine was great. Cynthia, if you're watching, thank you very much. Her name is Cynthia Way. She's still out there doing great stuff. Her company's called The Way to Go. And she grew me a lot. Right? And I'll be eternally grateful for that. But I think today, because of everything I just said, the ability to look at where we're strong, where we're weak, rather than have one person do that, we ought to have an adaptive leadership coaching network. Right? What's that mean? You know, think about a professional golfer. If I go out and take a golf lesson, I'm not a professional golfer, but what I do is I hire somebody from whatever golf course I'm at, the training pro or whatever. He comes on, talks to me about my grip and my stance and my swing and follow through and how to read greens and all that other stuff. You go up a couple of levels and you start looking at the, Ricky Fowler and Nelly Cordes of the world. They have a coach for all those things, right? Different ones. They have a swing coach. They have a greens coach. They have a putting coach. Why? Because people specialize in a particular area. And they really, really know what they're talking about in that area. One coach can't assess everything. And so why can't we adopt the same sort of thing? As an organization, why not have an influence coach, a communications coach, an empathy coach, a communications, public speaking coach, all of these things that you could tap into on a regular and routine basis. So this idea of a coaching network that organizations would have, or at least have access to, coupled with the idea of being able to define competencies and strengths and weaknesses across these 21st century competencies, really leads to some pretty cool ideas. So I have one more. And this one's kind of things that are already done, but roll all those things that we just talked about into, but don't we still want to get together and hear from other leaders and talk about our current challenges. And so kind of define this, and I'm calling this a lunchtime leadership lab, right? So it comes with pizza or, Jimmy John's or whatever it is you want to order, but basically 45 to 60 minutes. It's designed to fit into busy professional schedules. And it leverages the lunch hour to provide compact, impactful leadership training sessions that promote continuous learning and development. Like I said, maybe once a week, once every other week, short, focused, 45 to 60 minutes, single topic. Diverse curriculum, right? Could be this week we're going to talk about communication, next week problem solving, next week conflict resolution, strategic thinking, whatever it is. We could also use some really cool ideas like Harvard case study methods. Hey, read this little case study, be ready to pick up the challenge and tell me what you do, right? Real world scenarios and problem solving exercises, simulated leadership challenges that we could practice and refine. And then, at the end, a little bit of feedback, say, hey, what did we get out of this? It can be done in person. It could certainly be done virtually to accommodate different locations and schedules, all that stuff. I think it's really important that we put some of these ideas into action in the near term. And that's why when we developed our Leadership Academy, I said, we're only going to do this if what we're going to do is different, meaningful, and impactful, right? And so I've just given you, I guess, 5 or 6 ideas of how what we're doing is different because the challenges that we meet today are different. I've got one more quick thing I want to toss out, and that is this idea of how do we select, recruit, and retain the people that are coming up in these new generations, right? And I'm going to offer 3 questions to ask them. 3 questions. The first one is, how do you handle failure? It's important because a lot of our upcoming young people haven't really been hit in the face with a dodgeball much. They haven't experienced failure too much in their lives. And so it's important to ask them that question, man. Can they give you an example of their resilience and problem solving, right? Did they learn from the failure? Those types of things. So that's question number 1. Question 2, how do you inspire people? Really tough one sometimes. But that's going to get at whether they have the capacity to influence a team, right? Do they understand people are different? Do they understand team dynamics? Are they able to articulate a vision that might not be their own? Right? Do they have empathy for the group that they're trying to inspire so that they can read the room, so to speak? So that's number 2. Number 3, I would ask them, how do you make decisions under pressure? Maybe even give them a tough question and put them under pressure. Look for their process, right? Look for their process. Are they analytical thinkers? Do they prioritize? Can they adapt to changing conditions? Do they remain calm and composed? So as we roll out this Leadership Academy next week, and if you're watching this asynchronously anytime after the 4th of July, 2024, it will already be out there so you can come back and look at it. I want to kind of wrap this up like we began it. The ships we're sailing today are different. We're driving Titanics, and old boat captain skills aren't going to do it. We don't need any more Captain Smiths driving us into metaphorical icebergs. So please reach out and touch us on this. If you're interested in leadership, and I know a lot of you are, if you're interested in looking at some fairly radical new concepts on how we identify, we train, we prepare, we continuously grow our leaders, take a good look at the Convergent Performance 21st Century Leadership Academy. I really don't want this to be a commercial for what we're doing. I apologize if it came across that way, but I'm looking for new ideas. I'm looking for new insights. I'm trying to develop new leaders, and I'm trying to become one. So with that, I'd like to say thanks for joining us again here today. Like always, grow where you are with the resources at hand, and I'll see you soon.